Last week we looked at the introduction and we covered the idea of we can always know and have pleasure in a God that doesn't change. And that's the whole thing here, is joy and pleasure. And it comes from our knowing God in the capacity that God has presented himself unlike any other. And so our trust and our joy, that is, whether it be the day we obey the gospel or when we pass from this life, our joy should be full because God has given us and promised us, and through his character, we know what our character should be. Through the teaching of his word, we can know what our conduct should be. And we looked at all these last week, and we attributed some things to God that is unlike that of man, such as him being holy. God cannot sin, does not sin, cannot be where sin is, and neither can we be where God is if we're in sin. And so tonight we're looking at section 2, and we're going to be looking at a few verses, even from the Old Testament, that teaches us that we serve a God who really cares for us. Now, when I say really cares, I'm just trying to emphasize some of the things that are God's greatness that nothing else compares to. I can know that the power of God exists. I can know that God is eternal. There is no other so-called religious leader or religions of the world who may follow different things, different men. Them are eternal. They're all in their graves. As a matter of fact, Acts 2 says even David himself was in his grave, but yet Christ was not. And so we're going to learn some things about God that produces within us a confidence and a strength that not only does he care for us, but in his capacity of caring, it's unlimited. Our caring, the best we can do, our caring is limited. It's limited by a number of things. We may even talk about some of those in Sunday morning's lesson. But yet, when we consider God, we're looking, and we're going to be looking first at Isaiah 57 and verse 15, if you'd like to turn there. Isaiah 57 and verse 15. And we're going to establish the fact that the God who cares for us, the God that we serve, the God whose character is merciful, the God who is the same to every person, either will save or condemn every person, will do it justly, is a God that is eternal. Now, in Isaiah 57 and verse 15, there's some things here that we need to understand about God, and I'm going to tell you right at the beginning here, there's some of these things that goes beyond maybe even the limit of man's wisdom. I'm not going to say my wisdom because I am so limited, and we all are limited, but yet when we look at the attributes of God, as we're going to be looking at here, we find that in many things that not only does nothing compare, but he is so great that it's our limited minds may struggle to understand. Now, Isaiah 57 and verse 15. For thus says the high and the lofty one who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. Now, let's stop right there. We're going to come back and we're going to read the rest of it. But he is high, he is the lofty one, and he is holy. I don't know, we've considered these things, but I don't know if you've ever thought about who inhabits eternity. Now, when we say inhabits eternity, no beginning and no end, there's a continuum that you and I cannot at all measure because we don't know. We don't know the eternal nature of God. When, God has always been, God always will be, but he inhabits eternity. Now, think about this for just a moment. In one sense of the word, he's not bound by time. God is not bound by time, but he exists in time. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about he exists with us, in us. He has given his Son. He has given his word. And he hasn't entered into judgment with us yet. So he, in one sense, he inhabits time, and in another sense, he inhabits eternity. Now, we might even struggle to understand how he inhabits time, how he exists in time. But when we think of time, we limit it to days, months, years, lifetime, whatever for us. God has always been and always will be. And so when we look at the point here that he inhabits eternity, God here is one who lives eternally. Now, I hesitate to use the word exist. It's okay. But for myself, if I say someone exists, it may indicate a beginning and an end. Now, if we were to qualify that, it would be all right to say that he exists. But from Isaiah 57 and verse 15, he says, he's holy, he is the lofty one, he is high, he dwells in the holy place. And notice the next thing that he says. I dwell in the high and the holy place with him who has a contrite and a humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite. Now, when we see time and eternity, one is measured, one is not. In one sense of the word, we can't even measure time because we don't know when time will end or time will cease. But God is in control, and he's in control of both. And so the last part of the passage here, when he says, those who are of a contrite and a humble spirit, those who revive this, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite one, that's God condescending to us. So we should rejoice in that we're not looking at some idol that only exists maybe out here, for example, this war memorial. It doesn't exist anywhere else but here in McRoberts. God exists everywhere. God also exists in the heart of man, those who are obedient to him. So he is eternal. Now, when we think of that, that shouldn't back us off from God. It should give us a sense here of someone who has not loved us 50, 60, 70 years. And you know, that's love. That's, you know, the love of our parents, our mate, and so on, our family and our friends. That's important. That's really important. But when we see that an eternal God cares for us, that causes us to rejoice. That brings a sense of happiness here, because we're not, and allow me to use this word here, we're not taking a chance at anything. It's steadfast and it's sure. If you could line up all the gods of this world and compare them to God, there would be no comparison, even if you grouped all of them together, because God is eternal. Let's note one other passage concerning this in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 10. And this is when, of course, Moses was receiving the commandments, and during the time that the tabernacle was being constructed and so on. But notice in Deuteronomy 10 and verse 14, a passage there that to me is really close to this here. It says, indeed, heaven and the highest heavens belong to the Lord your God, also the earth that is in it. So it's not just that he exists in eternity, but and he created all things celestial and also things on earth. But notice it says here that indeed heaven and the highest heavens belong to you. It could have been, I'm just saying, for the sake of clarifying this verse, it may be that there are heavens and heavens and heavens beyond what we see. We don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't have any idea. But this passage is saying, whatever exists, God's greater than they are. He created them and he allowed them to exist. Which leads us to the second point, and that is that God is infinity. He's infinite. He's infinite. And he's not, in the passage we're going to read here, it's not that we're saying he's infinite and he's, something beyond our comprehension at times. But the idea here of being infinite and being eternal complement one another. And it should cause us a great sense of peace to know that our God is infinite. 1 Kings 8 and verse 27. 1 Kings 8 and verse 27, it says, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, the heavens of heavens cannot contain you." He's infinite. Cannot contain you. How much less this temple which I have built. See, they were constructing a temple that God's presence would be within. He says, God says, well, the heaven and heaven, or rather they're saying of God, the heaven of heavens can't contain you. But yet here's this tabernacle. I don't know how you would compare one size to another, but it wasn't the measuring of one and the measuring of other. It's showing that one is small and the other is infinite. And that's the way God is. And so our understanding of God in these two things here shows us the greatness of God, greater than man, greater than any religion that may exist, greater than, I don't know what the largest religion might be and how many members there might be pledging their allegiance to that God. I have no idea. But millions upon millions upon millions, if they were worshiping this God, does not make it right. Worshiping the God of heaven through his word is right, and he is not only infinite, but he's eternal. So we need to rejoice in that. We need to rejoice in that. It's not that we have some sort of an image or totem pole or some image of some man sitting up here, and every so long we have to knock the dust off of it and paint them up, make them look good or anything like that. God is infinite. Now you might be familiar with the next 3 points. He is omnipotent. He is all power. Everything that exists as far as power is concerned, God has that power. Notice Jeremiah 32 and verse 17. Again, we're going to see a comparison between the earth he created, the firmaments and the heavens that he created as well. And notice what 32 and verse 17 of Jeremiah says. It says, "Behold, you have made the heavens and the earth." That's God's creative power. Nothing compares to it. He has the power over it. He brought it into existence. It says, "You have power over the heavens and the earth, and your great power is an outstretched arm. There is nothing too hard for you." There's nothing too hard for you. You mean to tell me that my sufferings are nothing to God? No, that's not what he's saying now. It says nothing is too great for our God. If we turn to him, he will take care of us. He can take care of every one of us. He'll provide for us rightly because he has all power. Also in the book of Jeremiah 32 and verse 27, as we read a while ago, he's the God of the flesh, or God of all flesh, and also it said there is anything too hard for me as well. So he has all power. That, understood, should cause us to rejoice, because we're not looking for any other source of power. It's all in God. Also, he is omnipresent. He's in all places at all times. The reading of Psalms 139 is one of my favorites. But verse 7 of that says, where will I go from your spirit? Psalms 139 and verse 7. Where can I go from your spirit? Or, where can I flee from your presence? Let's say of the 18, 20 people that are here tonight, that we were equally spaced around the world. Four of us were on north, south, east, and west. We were equally spaced around the world. And each one of us is doing a different thing at a different time. We may be working in a mine. We may be on the top of a tower somewhere. We may be on the sea or whatever. God knows and is in all places. He knows the Christians here. He knows the Christians in Kentucky, United States, the world. He's in all places at all times. Now, reason for that is we're all accountable to him. So it's not that the internet goes out and we're limited as to what we can see. God is not like that. Or the TV goes out and we don't have any news. God's not like that. If anyone tunes out of God or loses God, it's us. We have to give up on him. He will not give up on us. So we serve a God who cares. We serve a God who really is concerned with our well-being. He is concerned with our welfare. He's concerned with that of our salvation, which leads us to the third word, and that's omniscient. He has all knowledge, knowing all things, and he is all wise. So he has all power, he is everywhere, and he has all knowledge. Isaiah, again, 46 and verse 10. He can declare the end from the beginning. We can't do that. We may say, okay, tonight at 9 o'clock I'm going to do this. We don't know if we're going to do that or not. If God says this is going to happen, and here is how this is going to be unfolded, and here's how it's going to come about. Think about this for just a moment when we speak of all knowledge. When we speak of all knowledge, many hundreds of years before Christ came, God spoke through the prophets. As a matter of fact, we can go back to Genesis 3 and verse 15, and we're told of one who was to come. Every bit of that happened just as God said it would happen, because he has all knowledge. He not only knew the beginning of man, but he knows the end of man. He not only knows how things are going to play out, but he knows the beginning and the end of those things. You remember in the book of Hebrews, he says, there's nothing hidden from his sight. He sees all things. There's nothing hidden that won't be revealed. Hebrews 4, there in verse 13. So we serve a God who cares because he has all knowledge. Here's a joke that we sort of go around with our family doctor. You go in and you got something wrong with you, and your doctor says, well, now hold on just a minute. I'm not familiar with that. Let me, and he reaches up on the shelf and he gets a book, he pulls it down there, he starts reading about it or whatever, and he becomes familiar with it. You're not going to trust that doctor very much, because he doesn't have any knowledge of what's wrong with you except what he might read right then. God has all knowledge. Think about this. When the first man and woman were created, God knew and had a plan for the redemption of mankind. Over thousands of years, this was unfolded and brought before that of that of mankind. And so Isaiah goes on to say in this, he says, you can establish the ancient times, you can establish the things from the end and the beginning. He says, your counsel will stand. Your counsel is steadfast. When God told the Israelites, or God told the Jews, or the Gentiles, or us today, he tells us something. He speaks with all knowledge. He doesn't say, let me figure this out. He has all knowledge. That's very comforting. And that should bring joy and happiness to us, because we don't have a God who's fumbling about trying to find answers for it. He knows everything. Now, we touched on this a little bit earlier, and We serve a God who cares, and how we know that is He created all things. In the beginning, God created the heavens and that of the earth. But I want us to notice from Nehemiah 9 and verse 6. We looked at this a little bit while ago, but Nehemiah 9 and verse 6. I want you to notice as they were rebuilding and trying to get things that were out of sorts there back into a city that God would be pleased with. It had been destroyed, it had been broken down, but the people had a mind to work. And in Nehemiah 9 and verse 6, they begin to speak of God. It says, you alone are the Lord. You have made the heavens, the heaven of heavens, with all your host, the earth and everything in it, the seas and everything that's in them. You preserve them all. You preserve them all. The host of heaven worships you. Now, when we see this is in Nehemiah. This is not in Genesis. It's not over in the New Testament somewhere, but in the book of Nehemiah. It attributes everything that is created to God, and God has the ability. God not only had the ability to create it, but God also in this, it is shown that all things were created and He sustains everything until He brings it in, or He, the world rather, is that of destroyed. Now, an interesting thing in looking and studying verses and also different versions of the Bible, reading the New King James, near the end it says, you preserve them all. You preserve them all. I think the King James says the same thing. But some of the older versions of the Bible says, and you save them all. You save them all. Same thing as preserve, but the idea of saving them all. I think that extends God's mercy and love to us as well. Not only to the things He created, and I've always said, and I truly believe, man will not destroy the earth. God will destroy the earth. Now, we may mistreat it, and it may end up being a garbage heap somewhere. God will destroy the world. But in this passage it says, and you preserve them all. You save them all. Everything that exists, and they're in your control. Now that's the kind of God that we need to rejoice in. That we need to rejoice in. I don't understand how some people, particularly those who call themselves Bible students, how they can study and study and study and study, supposedly, and yet come up with some of these conclusions that man and denominations come up with. Now, you might say, well, they're reading the wrong books. That may be true. But just reading this passage from the Bible, look what it does and what it says about that of God. You preserve everything that is. There's another, I don't know who the group is, but they're starting with all the evidence now. They're starting now to say that the earth is flat again, that we still haven't found the edge. Saw that this week. Let me tell you something. God created it all. The Bible talks about how the earth is made and so on. He even talks about the seas and everything. Do we have any control over the seas? No. Jesus calmed the waves. Do we even, we've been, Pam's dad and me, we were not lost on Cherokee Lake. Well, yeah, we were. We were lost on Cherokee Lake. That's nothing compared to one of the oceans or one of the seas. But yet God knows all things. Even the paths of the seas that are travelways and so on. So He cares. He created us, and surely we can understand that He will take care of us. Now, the last point in this section is that, and it's sort of a summary, this God who is infinite, this God who is omniscient, this God who is omnipresent and all-knowing, this is the God who really cares for us. He's not somewhere that we can't find him. He's not somewhere that we can't understand him. He's not a God that we haven't been given instructions as to what we need to do or what we need to follow. He's a God that we can know. He's a God that we can serve, and he has proved his love toward us in that Jesus died for us. The psalmist says in Psalms 93, I believe it is. Oh, let me correct that. 8 and verse 4. What is man that you mindful of him? What is it? That's a good question. I'm going to answer it. You know why God cares for man? He created him. He doesn't want him to be lost. And so, who is man that you gave your son for? Think about that. You see the vein of thought that I'm following on this. Why should you even care for man? And every one of the points that we have made tonight shows why he cares for us. And why we need to have this happiness and this joy in this, as Ephesians says, another passage, in one God. One God. And how he loves us and how he cares for us. Peter says that we're to humble ourselves in the sight of God, for he cares for us. I don't know the idea of exalting and studying some other points. I think a lot of things, lying, the idea here of pride, the idea of selfishness, I think all that begins in a person who has too high of an estimation of themselves. Now, first of all with God, second of all of man. If we're motivated by these things to try to be better than others rather than humbling ourselves in the sight of God, then we have missed the point here that God cares for mankind. God cares for us. God hears us. But we cannot and do not have the right to tell God what he needs to do. He tells us. And so we need to follow that. You remember the book of Matthew chapter 10, where it talks about 2 sparrows. They're sold for a farthing. I understand a farthing, if what I read is true, is something much less than a penny back in that day. And he says, these sparrows are really insignificant. They're cheap. They're easy to buy. They're easy to purchase. Here, if you see 2 sparrows, would be the value of these 2 sparrows, a farthing. And I'm going to add something to this. But God cares so much that not one of them falls to the ground that he doesn't know. Now, what's he teaching in this passage? He's saying God's creation, God knows and God cares for them. If he cares for the sparrow, and we know that his eye is on the sparrow, surely he cares for us. Now, an interesting point in this, it says even the very hairs of your head are numbered. Now listen how silly some things can be. It is estimated that a person with red hair has 90,000 hairs. A person with dark hair has 120,000 hairs. A blonde-headed person has 140,000 hairs. Do you think that's the lesson here? No. It's not how many hairs we have. God knows us that well. That's what he's saying here. He says God cares for us, and if need be, he knows every hair from our head. If the sparrow falls, he cares for it, and he cares for us, and he provides for us. And so I found that quite interesting, how that sometimes, and I think Luke's account says that the 2 sparrows are sold for 2 copper coins, I believe it is, and yet they're not forgotten of God. I tell you right now, that gives me a sense of joy and happiness. Joy and happiness. Because if God takes care of these birds that to us are insignificant. To us, maybe at times may seem like a nuisance. He surely cares for us. And so our joy and our rejoicing is not in things that change, or not in things that it just runs its course and it's over. God is the same, always has been the same, and will be the same. And so we pointed that out tonight. So we probably should quit right here. And the next, there's two more sections. The next section is the Christian has a Savior in whom he can find peace. And that again brings us the joy and the comfort that comes. Now, some people, in closing, some people claims they know religion and follow religion and don't know God. Some people says that they're religious and they don't know Christ. They don't even recognize Christ as the Son of God. And yet there are people who carries a Bible. They claim to be religious, but apparently they're not listening to it and studying it, because what they say is not found in the book. And so when we see our God, how he works in us and through us, and how he cares for us and provides for us, we have pointed out here that God is not like man. So I don't want us to leave the building with this thought. Okay, is God saying, okay, tomorrow so-and-so is going to have a wreck, and it's going to be a terrible wreck? No, I don't want you to leave the building saying that or believing that. I believe God cares. I believe accidents happen. But I don't believe God deliberately causes a calamity to come upon us. Now, calamity comes in sin. The Bible says that. But God does not cause these calamities to come upon us. They're man-created many times. So we rejoice in the sense that God cares for us, the one God, the only God. And through him and by him we can have the forgiveness and the remission of our sins. Perhaps tonight you're not a Christian, you're not a child of God, perhaps you failed in your trying, and you need to make correction in your life. Can you see how we who here at McRoberts, that our religion is not in man. We're not intending to follow a man or some of the gods of this world. We follow the God of heaven. And when we put our finger on the passage, we search for the meaning of it. And we want everyone to do that. Can we help you tonight? Do you need to obey the gospel tonight or make correction?